Hi guys, Dave back again, G7IYK. This is a quick video on the configuration options available. I think we've done a video on kind of moving the loop and finding the loop, and there's going to be one on configuration. On presets and the VSWR cal. We've already done that. So yeah, we got some config options which we'll just quickly go over. So the config is the fourth option on this menu. So if I move down to the fourth option and then select it, so we've got the lower and the upper limits. I think I might have mentioned this in another video, but they have multiple effects on operation. They basically dictate the range over which the tuner will scan. So in this case, between 6.5 and 14.2 megahertz, because that's where I know when my loop is resonant. There's not much point looking for my loop outside of that range because it can't be resonant there. So that speeds things up and saves you having to search over the entire amateur band to look for a loop when you know it can only be in certain places. Also, they act to provide a software-based limit system. By that I mean that if you attempt to move the loop higher than 14.2 or lower than 6.5, the tuner will stop the motor moving. The reason for that is depending on what type of capacitor you're using. I mean, my capacitor is the sort of standard, interleaved plate air-spaced capacitor, and in my particular case it wouldn't make much difference if I tried to move it out of range because the capacitor just keeps spinning round and round in circles. But if you're using a high isolation vacuum based capacitor, they don't work that way, and they do have a hard upper and lower limit. And if the motor, a high gear, a motor with a lot of torque because of a gearbox attempts to move the capacitor past its end stop, it could damage the cap or break the coupling or the motor or gearbox, or lots of other things could go wrong. So yeah, if you try and say, for example, move above 14.2, it'll stop you. It won't let you move above 14.2 by using the manual control either. And what will happen is it will allow you to use the manual control, but only to move the frequency lower than the upper limit or higher than the lower limit. So you can use the manual control to move the antenna back in range, but not further out of range, if that makes sense. What else can we say? Yeah, so basically whatever you do on the hardware display here is echoed on the user on the PC user interface. So for example, let's change something. So if I select lower limit and I move my cursor across to say the 5, so 6.5. Now as I move this up, we can see that there we go. I couldn't move it lower because it was already set that low. So I can move it as I'm changing the value on the hardware. It's moving on the PC GUI at the same time. So I've moved back to 6.5. There we go. Select that. Now, similarly, if I change it on the GUI, it updates on the LCD display at the same time. So that's the higher and upper lower limits. So let's go to the next page. There's two, so we've gone to next, select. So this is config menu 2, and we've got backlash compensation. Now just a little bit about backlash for those that may not know what it is. Generally speaking, most people tend to use a motor with some sort of reduction gearbox. My stepper motor's got a 27:1 planetary gearbox bolted on the back of it. I've seen guys using DC motors with worm gear type reduction gearboxes, giving them sort of a few RPM. So the problem with a gearbox, unless you spend absolutely crazy money on a gearbox, but generally the problem with a gearbox is that it'll have what's called backlash, and all that is pretty simple really. There's slop in the gearbox, there's slack in the gearbox, it's mechanical. There's gears and they mesh. So when you reverse the direction of the motor, it takes time for that slack to be taken up, or that slop to be taken up. So the motor will be turning, but the output drive won't move for some time until that slack is taken up, and that's called backlash. And it happens when you it happens when you reverse the motor. So when you're moving in one direction and then you go to reverse the motor, you'll know you've got so much backlash, and it is completely dependent on. It's dependent on a lot of factors: the gearbox, the type of coupling you've used between the motor and the capacitor itself. There's lots of things that contribute to backlash, but it tends to be fixed for a particular mechanical arrangement. So what that backlash compensation does is whenever the tuner detects that you've changed the motor's changed direction, whether that's automatically or manually, it will introduce that number of motor movements. So if that's a stepper motor, it's motor movements, so in this case 38 motor movements, and obviously the motor movements are quite small. And if it was a DC motor, it would be a measure of time that the motor was running for. And you can't, you have to experiment to come up with that number. You have to sort of play with your mechanical arrangement and figure out how much it needs to be in order for you to move backwards and forwards and end up where you started, if that makes any sense. So if I change this on the GUI on the PC application, it increments on the hardware platform 38, 39, and if I select it here, I don't need to select it. Sorry, if I just move it up and down with the rotary encoder, it dutifully changes on the PC application. And similarly, there's then the next option here. There's only two options: is motor, which is either stepper or DC. So if I click the DC option, the stepper mode PC application button, it changes on the PC application. It changes on the hardware. And similarly, if I select motor and then change it here, it changes on the hardware and also changes on the PC application. Yeah, with a slight lag because of the update rate on the PC application, but it's about half a second. So yeah, those are, and then you just go down here to back to the first menu, and then back to the main menu, and then you can just hit find my loop, and then off you go again. So that's it. So there aren't many configuration options. They may end up, I may end up growing more configuration options as time goes on, and I find things that need adding in, but there's no reason that you can't add pretty much as many as I want, really. So where are we? Where is it? It's still at around about 7.2. It's drifted up a little bit. So anyway, that's configuration. So yeah, cool. Thanks for watching. Cheers.